I do want to say that the main intended audience for this is teachers of university level students and high school level students. But if you are someone who teaches young learners, um, I mean, I'm going to talk about something I learned when I was 10 years old. So I think there's information in there for you too. So you can relax a little, but hopefully you will also find it useful because, of course, that is what you're preparing your students for. So I know you got a little bit about my background, but I did want to say that I've been both doing teaching and teacher training for a number of years, mostly at the university level and with language schools, but that includes business people and people in the world of work. I also edit a lot of documents, including academic documents and books, textbooks, fiction, everything. And I am a co-author on one level and a series consultant for Skillful. So I've seen all of the levels of Skillful, which is an academic textbook. So the specific examples that I show you today are all going to be from Skillful because that's the series that I know. And mostly I'm going to be showing you things that I wrote because I can tell you why I wrote them. So Skillful is just coming into its third edition. This is the second edition. That's not a beautiful graphic from Macmillan. That's my box of Skillfuls on my own living room floor. So that's the current edition that's out now. And just being released is a third edition of this book. And I'll explain to you a little bit how it's put together. But first I want to talk about what I mean by academic. And when I sat down to create this presentation, I was thinking, I sometimes feel a little impatient when I go to workshops or presentations and they start everything with a dictionary definition. You know, before we can talk about communicative competence, we need to define communicative and we need to define competence, and there come the dictionary definitions. And yet, when I set out to create this presentation, I realized we do have to talk about what is meant by academic. Of course, we know that academic is a bit more formal, so we would say we wouldn't use as many contractions. In fact, we would use more sophisticated vocabulary. I'm not going to give you a dictionary definition. You're all smart people and you're connected to the internet. You can look it up if you care for a dictionary definition. But when we talk about academic language, these are some of the features that I see mentioned. A certain type of vocabulary, and we do have this wonderful academic word list that has collected academic vocabulary and ranked it in terms of frequency and importance. We do have more formal language conventions, like the lack of contractions, the lack of parentheses, sort of habits of expressing ourselves. Nouns are more common, noun phrases, nominalization, fancier structures, more formalized structures. You can find lists of all this kind of stuff easily online. But I'm going to say that's just language. And you might say, but we are language teachers. Isn't language the most important? Yes, but it's also what we do with the language that I think is different for what I mean by an academic mindset. So when I think of academic language, I'm not so much thinking of the lack of contractions, but I'm thinking of a mind shift towards topics. When students start with general English, there's a lot of personalization, a lot of talking about yourself. Who are the members of your family? What are your favorite foods? What do you like to do on the weekends? What are your hobbies? And that's fine. That's certainly English. But academic language is moving the student from the personal to something connected to other people. When I say communal importance, I mean it could be your family, not your family, but your town, your country. Global obviously means global. So students need to move from thinking about how does everything affect me into sort of thinking, how do I affect other things in the world? What is my place in the world? I think students need to distinguish different kinds of information. And there is a certain sort of textbook exercise that I feel impatient with, that has just fact and opinion, and it gives you, a fact, water freezes at 0, opinion, I like chocolate, and then there comes an exercise. Students don't confuse those two things. But if you have a statement like, climate change is the most important issue facing the globe now, we can't call that a fact. It is an opinion, but it's what I would call an informed opinion, because you can explain it, you can debate it, somebody can agree, somebody can disagree and say, no, I think human rights is a more important global issue. There's something to be discussed. Along with that goes the ability to explain your ideas and defend them and support them, whether it's through logic or reasoning or outside sources or information. I think students need the ability to discuss something more complex than, I like this, I don't like that. They need to be able to discuss questions that don't have answers and issues that don't have one correct solution or outcome. Increasingly, I think it's important for students to be able to fact check information, especially as more AI-generated texts come in. I'm sure you've seen examples of a ChatGPT generated text that sounds like beautiful English, but contains factual errors. In the last 5, 6, 8 years, in the United States, where I live, I have seen an increasing populist movement to say that everybody's opinion is valid, that if you believe something, that becomes your truth, and that's just as good as anybody else's truth. And that's what I would call the opposite of academic thinking. Honestly, that's what brought us Brexit and Trump. So there's an importance to teaching students to critically evaluate information and react to something besides their gut feeling of, I like this or I don't like that. And I'm going to put in there the ability to react to the information that you get. If you learn something, it should have the potential to change you. That you could change your mind, you could change your opinion, you could change your actions, that's part of being academic. So I like this definition of an academic mindset and academic language. So if you have an academic mindset, it means you can skillfully engage with other people on topics of universal importance. And that universe could be the whole world, or it could be the universe of your country, or the universe of your school, or the universe of your community. So I would say academic language is not language for school. It's language that you use at school to do something more important, right? To engage with the world. And if you want to know where this definition comes from, it comes from me. Today, here, now, I wrote it. That's what academic language is to me. So Skillful is it's a course book. It's divided into a listening speaking strand and a reading writing strand. Both those strands, there's 5 levels of each, have the same topics, but different texts and different grammar and different vocabulary. This is an example of some of the topics. I've mixed them all from different levels. You probably cannot tell what is a level 1 text and what is a level 4 text topic. There's nothing innately academic about these broad topics. What's academic is the text and the angle and what we do with them, right? Any of these could be general English topics. Many students will have already encountered these topics or aspects of them in general English, but now we want to move them to something more sophisticated. So the way the books are laid out, each unit opens with an infographic to introduce you to the topic. Then there's a video with tasks. There's a first listening or a first reading with some vocabulary and tasks. There's a distinct academic skill, and I'll be showing you examples of these. Then there's a second longer listening or a second longer reading, also with vocabulary and tasks. There's a specific critical thinking section, another distinct vocabulary section with both academic vocabulary and what we call vocabulary development. So you'll notice already it's pretty vocabulary heavy. I would say it's a vocabulary heavy approach. One of my favorite language sayings is, you know, without grammar, you can't say much. Without vocabulary, you can't say anything. So I do think vocabulary is hugely important. Then we have a model of the final task, so a speaking model or a writing model, which is an example of what we are going to ask students to create. A speaking skill or a writing skill. We have the grammar that's necessary to carry out these tasks. The listening speaking also has pronunciation. Finally, we have a task and review. So that takes 18 pages to take one topic and flesh it out in an academic sense. So how do you get students to see that difference? So I took an example of a topic from one of the lower levels of food. I think if ever use a general course book, you've probably seen food as a topic before with questions like this. What do you like? What do you eat? What do you not like? Where do you eat? Maybe there's a task, a plan a party. And again, that's not bad language learning or teaching, but I would call it a point of departure if we're moving towards something more academic. These would be academic topics, something about food that affects more people, where food is, where it comes from, how it's grown, what are the issues around food, cost and distribution and health, how does climate change affect food? Any of those would be academic topics. Food preservation, food waste. So food waste is actually the opening graphic of that unit. So if you look at the discussion point, that first question starts with a more general question: which food group in the infographic do you eat the most of? So that's something personal. What do you eat the most of? What do you eat the least of? But then we get to the academic topic. And this is just a preview of what's coming in the unit. But what do you waste the most? Why do you think there is waste? What can we do about it? So that gets people thinking about it. And then when they have that first listening, they're going to hear not only facts about food waste, but the implications and the importance and the why do you care. One thing I think is important to do with students when you're teaching academic language is to let them know why you're teaching them what you're teaching them, both in terms of topic, but also in terms of skills. What skill are you learning with this exercise? What skill are you learning with this presentation? So this is an example of that food unit from the listening speaking book on top and the reading writing book on the bottom. For a topic, and I'm going to speak as a writer now, for a topic like food, it's not that hard actually to get students interested. But I want to give you an example of a unit that I wrote where the topic might seem a little more removed from students. And talk about the challenges that I had going through this process. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you personally understand the importance of the topic. Why is it important for students to be able to engage with this topic? And not just sort of feel it, but be able to put it into words. So that if a student asked you, teacher, why are we learning this? You would have an answer already formulated in your mind. I think it's fine to start with a personal angle. What kind of food do you eat the most of and why? But then you want to move, and you could move from small to large. How does this affect a small group, your friends or your family? How does it affect clubs that you belong to or smaller organizations? And then your community, your country, and finally, the whole world. So help them see those connections. If you have a topic that you think might be difficult or remote for your students, begin collecting examples that relate to their own countries and their own cities and their own experiences. So you have these examples ready at your fingertips. But I would also turn it around and make sure that students can articulate the same thing. One question I like to ask students to get at this is, imagine your grandmother asks you, what did you learn in school today? And you say, oh, we talked about food waste. And your grandmother says, food waste, I'm not very interested. What could you tell her to help her understand why this is important? And even the students who have been telling you, oh, teacher, I don't get it, once they've been given the task of explaining it to someone else, they'll often come around and they will have that energy and that understanding to give that explanation to somebody else. So I went through this with one of my units that I was writing when my global topic was movement. And so I chose my angles and what I was going to write about. And my editor said, oh, I don't find this topic very interesting. And I thought, oh dear, if my editor does not find it interesting, how am I going to help teachers and students understand how interesting it is? So I asked my editor a question, which I will ask you. What is true about 90% of the goods in the world? All goods, clothing, eyeglasses, cars, bicycles, computers, phones, food. What do 90% of the goods in the world have in common? And you can pop your guesses or your answers, if you know it, into the chat and see if anybody has an idea of what is true about 90% of things in the world. So my editor didn't know the answer until I gave it to her. The answer is that 90% of the goods in the world have moved around the world on a cargo container ship. So I was going to write an article on cargo container shipping. I don't expect a student to come into my class passionate about cargo container shipping. I don't really expect them to leave my class wanting to become a cargo container shipper, but I do want them to understand why this topic is so important. 90% of everything. There's actually a fascinating book that I would recommend to you as teachers to read called 90% of Everything, about cargo container shipping and the world of how things move around the world and how that whole system works. But I also remembered when I was thinking about shipping about my first deep academic experience, when I thought back to what was the first research paper that I wrote. So the first research paper I ever wrote, I did in 4th grade when I was 10. It probably wasn't a very good research paper, but I was starting to read outside sources and consolidate information from different viewpoints and to add my opinion to what I'd read and to make sense of it all. And for some reason, I chose the topic of the Panama Canal. And I can no longer remember why or how I chose that topic. I have no connection to Panama or boats or shipping, neither did my family. Somehow I chose that topic. But the feeling I had when I went to the library and read books that I normally would never have picked up, and I learned something. And it was the most wonderful feeling. And I could go home for the first time in my little scholastic life with information about an adult topic that my parents didn't have. I had become an expert because I had done some research and I had understood something. So with that memory of how important that was for me, the first reading that I put into this skillful unit is a history of the Panama Canal with probably a more sophisticated explanation of it than I got when I was 10. But an explanation of why that canal was so important and how it changed the world and the way that we live. I also remembered, um, as I mentioned, I live in Oregon on the west coast of North America. I have a friend up in Vancouver, Canada, also west coast. They have a similar climate to ours, very wet, lots of rain, and he works at the Port of Vancouver. And we had a situation in 2021 where Vancouver had a lot of heavy, heavy rains, which took out the three main highways going into and out of Vancouver, and it disabled the railways. But Vancouver is a port city. So all those goods coming into Canada and all those goods that should go out of Canada can't move, right? They can't get onto the ships, they can't come off of the ships because the rest of the infrastructure is gone. And he was explaining to me how that meant people in British Columbia, which has a significant portion of Canada's population, couldn't get meat and milk that they get from the Midwest and from Quebec. They couldn't send Christmas gifts from China and tangerines and things that had come in from Asia were stuck in the port and couldn't go out. And he told it in a very dramatic way. So as I was writing this unit, I asked him, hey, are there any interesting issues around ports and shipping? Because I have the passageway for how boats move, but I wonder if there's anything, with ports that would be interesting to students. I would love an issue that had two sides. And he said, oh, let me tell you about the challenges the Port of Vancouver is facing. This issue has more than two sides. It has 4 or 5 sides. And I thought, oh, good. So my next reading became about the Port of Vancouver and the struggles they are facing in the fact that they need to expand, but expansion has issues. There's environmental impact, there are people and Indigenous people who might be displaced. There's certainly financial impact. There's a government organization, there's a private company organization, there's a private individual who owns a coal terminal in the sea. So there's a lot of different sides to this issue, and there isn't one correct answer. But since it affects so much of North America, it's worth discussing. So this is what the beginning of the reading looks like, and you'll see some little spaces by the paragraphs. I'll get to that. So the vocabulary that we do right before listening or right before a reading is words from the academic word list, but also words that you would need to know in order to comprehend that text. So we pre-teach some words so that when students do the reading, it's not so dense for them, and they also are seeing those words again and again and getting some reinforcement. So we have some I think a pretty typical looking vocabulary exercise, but I also have that space of the vocabulary exercise where I can give some information. And I wanted to talk about the First Nations people who are the Indigenous people of Canada and their relationship to the land, because that's going to come, that's an issue in the port expansion. We have some discussion questions, some kind of prediction. What do you think the issues are? Then my reading skill was to annotate and to understand that if you're reading a long, dense academic text, you need to stop and mentally summarize and understand each paragraph, sort of summarize it. We call that annotating. You'd write it in the margins. So here I've given them the labels. So they go back and they label those paragraphs with their function. What is it that they're doing? Then after the reading, when we're doing some detailed questions, now they see how the annotations help them find that specific information. When I watch students sometimes with exam preparations, if they're working on the TOEFL or something like that, and those long readings come, and then the questions, and students are lost. They've done the reading, they have the questions, but to go back and answer them, they start again on the first sentence of the paragraph. Like, if they understood text organization and they had annotated it for themselves, it would be so much easier for them to find that specific information when they need to. So that's what I mean by an academic skill. That's, I don't read a novel that way, but if I needed to find out some information, these are the kinds of skills that help me learn. Um, I have, after every listening or every reading, there are critical thinking questions, and they're definitely discussion questions. There isn't a right answer or a wrong answer. There's opinions that need to be supported with your reasons why. I talked about the different types of vocabulary. We have an academic section that's just the academic word list, vocabulary, and idioms. But when I talk about vocabulary development, it's like areas of vocabulary. In this case, if we're going to talk about expanding a port or expanding the Panama Canal, which was recently expanded, we need language for change, tearing things down, keeping things the same, building them up, expanding them. So all of that vocabulary they will need in order to write about or discuss this kind of issue. I talked earlier about fact, opinion, and informed opinion. This book is level 3, so it's a bit higher in level and a few steps beyond just fact, opinion, informed opinion. Is different kinds of claims. Are they policy? Are they value? Or are they fact? And when you read and listen to other people's arguments and assertions, it's important to be able to unpack what is a fact, what is a policy, and what is a value, because you will respond to those things differently. For our writing model, so this is an example of the kind of text we expect a student to produce. So they have, sort of a roadmap of where they're going. So they'll be writing something about this long, and they're talking about change in land. So they do some work understanding the model and how it's put together. We pick out the grammar that will be not only useful for reading about this kind of change, but also for writing about this kind of change. So the grammar is very closely tied to the genres they're reading and the genres that they're writing. We have a writing skill, in this case, to avoid repetition. And to add a bit of variety to your writing, what are some expressions you can use instead of just the future with will all the time? So your writing will sound more nuanced and more sophisticated if you have several expressions at your fingertips. And then finally, they have a writing task, and we take them through the process of from brainstorming to planning to writing to peer review. That's similar to the model, but different. The model was showing undeveloped land going to developed land. For the writing task, we thought it would be actually more interesting to take a very developed piece of land and talk about kind of environmentally reclaiming that land and making it greener, which would be a nice direction to move in. Do you know what this is? This is the Panama Canal. And do you know when this picture was taken? No, you don't, but I will tell you. It was taken mid-January of this year, and it was taken by me. I'm standing on that ship. We're in a lock. That's sea level. And because of the way locks work, we are going to raise up to the height of that lake and sail onto that lake. The Panama Canal brings you up like stairs. So I read about it, I dreamed about it, but even though I understand how locks work, I don't even know if I have the words to explain to you how incredibly moving it was to be on the boat, feeling that happen. That is the genius of engineering. It took thousands of people. People died building the canal so that you and I can have cell phones and t-shirts and food. So to be on that boat as it was moving, an emotional experience. It took me 50 years to get there, but when I finally got there, from the time of that that first time when I had that experience learning about the outside world for myself, to the time where I could see it with my own eyes, sorry, on a windy day. That's the feeling that I want for your students. It's not that every activity you do in classes is fun the way it is sometimes in young learners classes, but if you can help your students understand how the information that you're exposing them to, how it's important, how it will help them understand their world, interact with their world, change their world, and give them the language skills that they need to do that. So they have their feelings and their ideas and their curiosity and their desire to learn. You're giving them the skills to interact with other people. So that's what I hope for your students and also for you. We do have some time for questions, comments. I have a helpful Macmillan person who's going to read them to me. I wish I could have shown you more things, but I want to hear from you too about challenges, questions, concerns, things you love about academic English. Hopefully there's something.
That was great, Dorothy. That was really, really, really great. And I love the emphasis on how academic skills can help us see kind of both sides of an argument. That nuance is so important in the world today, and for our students as well. For everyone, you know, we could do with it in some adults as well. I think I really love your example of the Panama Canal, and I remember the first time I went to see the Panama Canal. It really is a feat of engineering. Really impressive.
Yeah. So.
So Dorothy, we do have a few questions
Sure.
From the audience. I'm just going to have a look at. There was one I saw which was a really interesting question from an anonymous attendee, very mysterious.
Okay, that's fine.
But they were asking to what extent skillful might be useful in kind of creating multimodal literacies and teaching multimodal literacy. So I don't know if you can speak to that with skillful.
No, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I think when I read multimodal literacies, it's a question about people understanding, helping our students understand input from different types of content, whether it be from reading, whether it be from video, whether it be from audio.
Yeah. So the skillful strands are, I mean, there's listening, speaking, which obviously still has some reading and writing. And then there's the reading and writing, which still has some listening and speaking. It's just that two skills are emphasized. If I were going to choose a book for a class, I would choose whatever they're weakest in, right? If your students are very verbal and they listen well, they speak well, give them the reading writing book, because you'll still have plenty of chances to read and write and listen. I mean, there's a video in every unit, whether it's the reading writing book or the listening speaking book. There's podcasts, there's articles. I know when I had students in the university, the easiest thing for them to understand was a textbook reading or a formal lecture. And the harder things for them to understand were journals or podcasts or anything that was a bit less straightforward. So absolutely, you want students to be getting input from all kinds of different sources and different genres and different types of input, because that's what they'll be interacting with. I don't know if I answered the question, but if not, maybe that person can ask for some clarification.
Yeah, sure. If that was if you were the anonymous attendee, drop in the chat if that answered your question or not. And then Fatima also had a question, Dorothy, about how skillful and its academic content can help students prepare if they're sitting IELTS. So I wonder whether, you know, how does skillful help prepare students for those IELTS tests?
Well, I think just a lot of what students get graded on in what I could consider the harder tasks, the writing or the speaking, is not your ability to have an opinion, but your ability to explain an opinion. And sometimes when students fall short, like they have 30 seconds to speak, but they stop at 15 seconds. Often it's because they've given what they think is an answer or an opinion, but they don't know where to go next. So to get into the habit of, here's my opinion, but here's why I think this, here's some implications, here's some support, here's some evidence, so that I would consider an academic mindset, that you don't just have an opinion, but you can explain and defend an opinion. You can even question or challenge your own opinion if you're unsure. So to the extent where an IELTS or a TOEFL or some kind of exam is looking for academic ability, but I would also say more sophisticated adult ability to carry on a conversation and go somewhere with your ideas. I think an academic preparation would be very helpful.
And I guess lots of those skills are great in English, but also totally transferable to what those students are doing in whatever course they might be studying at university. You know,
Right.
I think
and once
they
leave university, we assume they're going to do something. They're going to get a job. They might marry and start a family and interact with other people. I mean, they're not going to, finish with university and then never interact with people again. So university should, and high school should be preparing them to live in a community and to live in the world anyway. So those same language skills are kind of life skills, really, that you would need to be a good and productive citizen.
Yeah, and the point you mentioned around being able to verify information in 2024, so important.
Suddenly that becomes a very important skill, doesn't it?
I think that could be one of the most important skills in anyone going forward, is understanding what's generated by artificial intelligence, what's real, whether that's text or even now, in video and audio content is becoming less and less easy to distinguish. Okay. If you do have any more questions for Dorothy, drop them in the chat. But I think for now, Dorothy, we'll say thank you very much.
Okay, and I will say thank you as well. That's my website. There's a contact form if you have any burning questions. If you have any burning questions about Skillful, then please ask Macmillan, because they're really the experts at that. And I would also like to thank Macmillan for giving me the opportunity to revisit my love of the Panama Canal.
And we will see you at some point later, Dorothy. We're going to let you go and get some sleep, because I think it's back at 6 o'clock in the morning. So thank you very, very, very much.